Today we're going to be talking about the water-soluble vitamins. The water-soluble vitamins include the 8 B vitamins. Most of these are involved in converting the energy in carbs, fat, and protein into ATP through their coenzyme function. Vitamin C is needed to make connective tissue and is also needed as an antioxidant. Water-soluble vitamins aren't stored, so they need to be consumed regularly. They're excreted in the urine, so typically, that's where it comes from when people say you have really expensive urine if you take too many supplements. But high doses of some of these vitamins can still be toxic. Vitamin B1 is the first B vitamin. It's a coenzyme needed for glucose breakdown to provide energy. It's needed for the metabolism of other sugars, certain amino acids, and for the synthesis of ribose, which is part of RNA. It's also important for nerve function because glucose is the nerve cell energy source. You might have heard that only carbs can feed the brain from chapter 4, and it's also needed to synthesize neurotransmitters. So this is just showing thiamin's function as a coenzyme in converting pyruvate, the final product of glycolysis, into acetyl-CoA, which then moves into the Krebs cycle and electron transport chain to create ATP. Acetyl-CoA can also go into neurotransmitter synthesis. The RDA is 1.2 milligrams per day for men and 1.1 for women. You can find this on your own iProfile. Those would be the values that are recommended for you at 100%. Sources, it's in the bran layer of whole grains. It's also added back to enriched grains through the enrichment process. It's in pork, legumes, and seeds as well. Deficiency, there are two major deficiencies. There's beriberi, which is involved in weakness, nerve degeneration, and heart changes. You can either have dry beriberi, which will cause emaciation, or wet beriberi, which causes swelling or edema. And then Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome in alcoholics, which causes mental confusion, psychosis, memory disturbances, and even coma. In terms of excess, there's no reported effects from thiamine. Here you can see thiamine sources are much wider spread than I mentioned in the last slide, but I mentioned some excellent sources of thiamine from each food group. And that is a picture of dry beriberi. You can see the nerve degeneration has ended up causing this person to not be able to walk anymore, so some paralysis at the extremities. Riboflavin is the next one. It's involved in forming two active coenzymes that act as electron carriers functioning in reactions needed to produce ATP from carbs, protein, and fat, and is also necessary to convert folate, niacin, B6, and vitamin K into their active forms. So riboflavin not only acts as a coenzyme, it also activates a variety of other vitamins. Very similar RDAs to thiamine, 1.3 milligrams for men, 1.1 for women. Sources include dairy, liver, red meat, poultry, fish, whole grains, enriched grains. Riboflavin is the second one added back in enriched grains. Asparagus, broccoli, mushrooms, and leafy greens. Deficiency is called ariboflavinosis. It causes injuries to heal poorly. Cracking of the lips and the corners of the mouth. It also causes this bright red tongue and inflammation of the tongue, eye burning, tearing, itching, skin flaking around the nose, eyebrows, and earlobes. There's no reported effects, but it's actually what turns your urine bright fluorescent yellow when you take a multivitamin. It's also destroyed by UV light, which is why we have a light block bottle for our milk products that are commercial. But as you can see, even if you're drinking milk from a glass bottle, which is how I prefer to drink my milk, you can see that riboflavin is pretty widespread in other things too. So if you are consuming beans or meat, if you're consuming grains, you will be getting some riboflavin. Niacin is the third B vitamin. It's a coenzyme in glucose metabolism and synthesis of fatty acids and cholesterol. The RDA is 16 milligrams of niacin equivalents per day. So niacin equivalents means there are a number of different forms of niacin. It's sort of beyond the scope of this class to talk about the different forms. If you take my Nutrition 230 class, we get into that. but it's looking at the actual niacin equivalents there. So 16 milligrams or 14 milligrams, males, females, respectively. Sources: meat, fish, peanuts, whole and enriched grains. It's the third B vitamin added back to enriched grains. Legumes, wheat bran, and it's also synthesized from the essential amino acid tryptophan. So the amino acid tryptophan side chain is actually, niacin is in that side chain. Deficiency is pellagra. Pellagra involves 4 Ds as symptoms, which include dermatitis, which is, the flaky skin, sensitivity to the sun, possible swelling of the gums as well, diarrhea, dementia, which can involve pica or the craving of non-food items, and death. And pellagra is actually thought to be part of the reason that somebody invented vampire folklore. So perhaps we would not have all our vampire movies if we didn't have pellagra. I guess one good outcome from it. Excess, there's no reported effects from excess of food, but supplements can be toxic. So if you ever take a pre-workout supplement, or if you take a couple 5-hour energy drinks, you might feel like hot and a little bit itchy, and that's niacin toxicity. That, doesn't tend to cause too many toxic effects, but if you had lots of pre-workouts or took 5-hour energy drinks or something, you could see some of this, these more toxic symptoms like nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, high blood sugar, problems with the liver, and blurred vision. So when we looked at pellagra, Goldberger was a researcher. He observed that individuals in institutions like hospitals, orphanages, and prisons suffered from pellagra, but the staff didn't. Pellagra was thought at the time to be an infectious disease. So the hypothesis was that pellagra was due to deficiency in the diet. So Goldberger and his coworkers added some nutritious foods to the diets of children in 2 orphanages, and the pellagra was alleviated. So then Goldberger and colleagues fed another 11 volunteers a diet that was lacking in niacin, and 6 of those 11 developed pellagra after 5 months of that experiment. So then we saw, finally in 1937, it was identified as a dietary component that cures and prevents pellagra. So when we look at this, you can see how discoveries are made about things like vitamins and minerals. And really, nutrition is such a new science. We didn't even know what niacin was until 1937, right? We didn't even identify it as a vitamin. So nutrition's pretty new, and we're still discovering new things all the time. Niacin sources, as you can see, it's in our whole grains, and it's in our meat and beans groups mainly. Biotin is the next one. We often think of biotin as a supplement used for hair and nails. It's a coenzyme in energy production and glucose synthesis, and is also important in fatty acid and amino acid metabolism. When we look at deficiency, deficiency usually only happens with malabsorption or malnutrition, and it causes nausea, thinning of hair, loss of hair color. We don't tend to see deficiencies of biotin too often. It's also synthesized by the GI bacteria as well, and it's found in a variety of sources. But we might see, high intakes of biotin helping with hair and nails. It's pretty high in prenatal vitamins. It's why people who are taking prenatal vitamins have such lovely hair and fingernails and want to keep taking them. I'd recommend an individual biotin supplement versus a prenatal vitamin, because prenatal vitamins really have different ratios of levels of vitamins needed for pregnancy. And biotin supplements themselves would be a little bit cheaper too. So if you're eating raw eggs, that would be what would put you at risk of biotin deficiency. So don't be like Rocky and consume raw eggs, or you'll prevent that biotin absorption, causing your hair and nails to thin and be brittle. Pantothenic acid is part of coenzyme A, or CoA, which is part of acetyl-CoA. That is the major component after pyruvate, right, that goes into the mitochondria that then is involved in carb, fatty acid, and amino acid breakdown. It's also needed to modify proteins, synthesize neurotransmitters, and certain hormones and certain other proteins like hemoglobin. And it's also needed to form a molecule that's essential for cholesterol and fatty acid synthesis. There's an AI for pantothenic acid because we don't have enough information to establish an RDA. That AI is 5 milligrams a day, and it's found widely distributed in food. We don't see deficiency symptoms in pantothenic acid. Plus, we don't typically like megadose pantothenic acid, so we don't see any excess reported effects either. B6 is our next one. It's important for amino acid and protein metabolism, also the synthesis of some non-essential amino acids, neurotransmitters, and hemoglobin, the conversion of tryptophan into niacin, so that's the removal of the side chain of tryptophan to make niacin, as well as the breakdown of glycogen. There are 3 forms of B6, pyridoxal, pyridoxine, and pyridoxamine. They're converted into the active coenzyme pyridoxal phosphate and needed for the activity of over 100 enzymes in carb, protein, and fat metabolism. So you can see here are B6's different functions. So it can be involved in removing a side chain from an amino acid. It can be involved in a transamination reaction, which involves adding a different side chain to that amino acid. It can also be involved as a coenzyme in ATP production or glucose synthesis, as well as neurotransmitter synthesis. So you can see, if you're a little bit more visual person, this depicts those B6 functions in a more comprehensive way for you. B6 is also involved in helping to create those neurotransmitters. We'll talk about the involvement of B12 in a little while in its function in helping with the myelin sheath, which is the coating that protects the nerves. B6 also functions in blood health, as I mentioned, with the creation of hemoglobin, which will cause us to prevent anemia. So B6 deficiency could cause anemia. B6 also functions in decreasing levels of homocysteine in the blood. High levels of homocysteine increase the risk of cardiovascular disease. B6's job is to turn homocysteine into cysteine through a coenzyme action. So B6 really lowers the risk of cardiovascular disease by lowering homocysteine levels. When we talk about folate and B12, we'll talk about the conversion of homocysteine back to methionine as well. And that is going to be another way that those 3 vitamins work together in order to decrease the risk of cardiovascular disease. The RDA is 1.3 milligrams a day. We can find it in meat, whole grains, legumes, seeds, bananas, broccoli, spinach, and then certain cereals are fortified with B6, but it is not added back to enriched grains, so refined grains would not be good sources. Deficiency could cause poor growth, skin lesions, decreased immunity, anemia, and neurological symptoms. And the only toxicity of B6 happens from supplements, and it really can cause severe nerve impairment because of its interference with the neurotransmitter function. And B6 sources, as you can see here, pretty high in the meat and beans group, as well as in whole grains, but it's not, as I mentioned before, found in refined grains. So we'll continue on with our water-soluble vitamins next time by talking about folate, B12, choline, which I mentioned was a vitamin-like substance but isn't an actual vitamin, as well as vitamin C.